Hello everyone, for this reaction video I chose Laura Bohannon's article, Shakespeare in the Bush. The article tells the story of an anthropologist who traveled to live among the Tiv people in Nigeria. While staying within the community, Bohannon believed that Shakespeare's Hamlet would be universally understood because she considered its themes to be timeless and applicable across all cultures. However, as she shared the story, the Tiv interpreted the events very differently. Their explanations reflected their own cultural beliefs, traditions, and worldview rather than the assumptions Bohannon brought with her. By the end of the experience, she realized that even a work considered a literary classic is understood through the cultural lens of its audience. This article clearly illustrates the impact of worldview on the interpretation of cultural meanings. Worldview influences how people understand family relationships, justice, morality, authority, and even supernatural events. Throughout the story, the Tiv interpreted Hamlet according to their own customs. For example, they viewed certain actions as completely reasonable because they aligned with their cultural expectations, while Bohannon initially saw these interpretations as incorrect because they differed from the traditional Western understanding of Shakespeare. This article demonstrates that people naturally make sense of unfamiliar situations using the beliefs and values that they have learned throughout their lives. One ethnocentric bias found in the article is Bohannon's initial assumption that Shakespeare's intended meaning would be understood the same by everyone, regardless of culture. She believed Western interpretations of Hamlet were universal and expected the Tiv to reach the same conclusions that she had. This assumption reflected ethnocentrism because it placed her own cultural understanding above other cultures' perspective. Her worldview shaped her expectations, leading her to believe that there was only one correct interpretation of the story. Instead, she discovered that the Tiv's interpretations were equally logical when viewed through their own cultural beliefs and experiences. This story challenges the idea that our own cultural values are normal or best. It reminds us that what feels obvious or natural to one group may seem unusual or even confusing to another. Every culture develops its own traditions, social expectations, and ways of interpreting the world. Rather than assuming our own perspectives are superior, intercultural communication requires humility and a willingness to understand why others think differently. As Christians, this is especially important because we are called to love others with humility and compassion rather than judgment. Maru, Campbell, and Greener emphasize that effective intercultural communication begins with recognizing our own cultural assumptions while seeking to understand others through respect and genuine relationship. One tradition in my own culture that might be viewed differently by someone from another culture is our emphasis on individual independence. In the United States, many people are encouraged to move away from home, make independent decisions, and become self-sufficient as adults. Someone from a more collectivist culture might see this as unusual or even disrespectful because family interdependence and caring for multiple generations under one roof are considered normal and honorable. Their worldview would shape how they interpret those behaviors, just as the Tiv interpreted Hamlet according to their own cultural beliefs. One best practice for communicating across cultures is to listen first before making assumptions. Instead of assuming we already understand another person's perspective, we should ask questions, observe carefully, and seek clarification. Bohannon eventually learned that meaningful communication requires understanding another person's cultural framework rather than expecting them to adopt to our own. This research builds trust, reduces misunderstandings, and creates opportunities for genuine relationships. I have personally witnessed cultural misunderstandings in my work as a paraprofessional in special education. Families from different cultural backgrounds sometimes have different expectations regarding communication with teachers, involvement in school activities, or approaches to discipline. At first, those differences can easily be misunderstood if viewed only through one cultural lens. However, taking time to understand each family's values often leads to stronger relationships and better outcomes for the students. This experience reminds me of Bohannon's realization that different worldviews shape how people interpret situations, and that understanding begins with listening instead of assuming. The most significant lesson I gained from this article is that no one interprets the world from a completely neutral perspective. Our worldview influences how we understand stories, relationships, communication, and even truth itself. Effective intercultural communication requires humility, curiosity, and respect for others' perspectives. As Christians, we should remember that sharing the love of Christ begins by listening well, treating others with dignity, and recognizing that every person has experiences that shape how they see the world. When we approach people with grace instead of assumptions, we become more effective communicators and better representatives of Christ's love. Thank you.